Welcome to episode 477 of the Recruitment Marketing and Sales Podcast. And I'm your host, Sharon Newey. Now, today's conversation is going to be a little different. We're going to look at your business from an alternative perspective. In the many years of coaching recruitment owners, I've noticed something fascinating. In terms of success, it's rarely the strategy that a company has, your market knowledge, or even your team that really is at the base of your success. It's something far more fundamental, and that's you and your beliefs. So today, we're going to have an honest conversation about how the stories that you tell yourself are shaping your business results, sometimes without even realizing it. I'll share some real stories from recruitment owners that I've coached. Names and industries probably changed, of course. And I'm going to share you and walk you through a really simple and yet incredibly powerful framework that's helped many of my clients break through some of their invisible barriers. So grab yourselves a drink, whether that's a hot or a cold one right now, and let's explore how changing your beliefs could be the breakthrough your recruitment business needs.
Welcome to the Recruitment Marketing and Sales Podcast. An obsessive focus on marketing and sales is the only way to accelerate your company growth. So listen in now as we share the latest strategies and techniques guaranteed to deliver you more placements and profits.
Hi everyone, it's Sharon here, and welcome to today's episode where we are talking about you and your beliefs, all the thoughts that you're having and the stories that you're telling yourself that potentially is impacting the results that you're currently getting. So let me start by sharing something that I frequently come across both with clients, but also when I'm on calls with prospects, and the different kind of thoughts that come across. But there's one that recently I've noticed particularly, and there's a particular individual that I've got in mind here. Let's call them Michael for the sake of this story. And they'd noticed that in their business that their results, their performance, it had plateaued and it hadn't really grown very much in the last 6 months. And this is something that commonly comes across when I'm talking to prospects. And when I asked Michael, let's say, what did he think was behind that plateau of their performance? It was just like a knee-jerk answer. And he said, well, the reality is that right now the market is just so competitive and tough. And of course, the big firms have got all the advantages in times like this. And I said, well, okay. I said, is that a fact though? Or is that a thought that you've just kept thinking? And he stopped in his tracks and he paused. And I could kind of like, so you see the cogs turning a little bit. And his comment was, well, I guess in reality, that's how I've been viewing things. If you think about it, if you keep having that thought that the big boys have got all the advantages, that they can work through more challenging markets and more competitive markets. It's a lot easier for them. And as a micro or a smaller SME business that you can't compete with that, well, then that is at some point, at some level, going to come across when you do your outreach, when you're having conversations with people, because you can't not communicate. You can't not communicate those feelings that you're having about how competitive you're finding the market and how you think that the big boys have got all the advantages. That can't not come through in some way to the conversations that you're having. In recruitment, where, let's be honest, rejection is a part of everyday life and market conditions are constantly shifting, then what you think and your beliefs become the lens through which you interpret everything that is going on. They're almost like that invisible force that's steering the ship. And ideally, what we want to be able to do is make those invisible forces actually visible and make you conscious and aware of what you're thinking and the impact of that, and so that you can then make some different choices. So going back to Michael, once he recognized this, everything started to change because he suddenly realized that, on the back of another conversation, that if he thought the following, which was, actually, what a fantastic opportunity for a smaller business to get ahead because it's more nimble and agile and can adapt more quickly. Then he created a new service that he took out to the market. And within a short space of time over the following quarter, things really started to change and he got a kick up again. And he just built from there. It's easy to think that, well, our thoughts, they're just our thoughts. And there's so much more. You see, your beliefs aren't just your thoughts. They are the foundations, really, of all the decisions that you're making for your business. They're about your confidence with clients. They're about your confidence as a leader with your team. And ultimately, they're about your results. Now, I don't know about you, but certainly when I think about results that I want to achieve and that we achieve in our business, then I want to have as much control of those results as possible. And so that means being really conscious about the thoughts that I'm having, and those being constructive thoughts that will move me forward rather than hold me back. Let's get specific then about some of the most common familiar beliefs that I hear during coaching sessions, and also when I'm having business development and sales calls as well. And just as you're listening, which sound familiar to you? You might hear other owners using them as you're having conversations, you're out networking, and also what might you be using? So here we go. It could be something like, my team just don't have the same drive that I do. It could be, I'm not really a natural salesperson. I came from industry. I haven't necessarily been trained and brought through other recruitment companies. So I'm never going to be great at winning new business. It could be, every time I feel like we're making progress, then something steps in and knocks us back or gets in the way. Of course, here's one. The economy, the market, the pandemic means that, well, this just isn't a good time to grow a business. And of course, we've had all those three examples literally in the last 5 years, haven't we? And here's another one. And I'll share more about this example later as well. Clients in my sector will never pay those higher fees. And a slightly different version of that is that, literally using these words, I don't believe in charging high fees. I think some recruitment companies overcharge. So that's one I've come across recently as well. So let's dive into this example in a bit more detail. Because some time ago, I was working with a client called Sam in the engineering space, and this was a really firmly held belief and thought that in Sam's sort of like world, then he'd always charged around 15 to 18% when the competition were clearly charging more. And yet, when I challenged Sam and just said, look, what is it that holds you back from asking for more? It was this kind of very clear belief that if he asked for more, then the clients would say no and he would lose them. And even if he asked potentially new clients and positioned his fees at that high level, well, then he'd just get a no. So there was a real fear of losing business here. And yet, when we talked about it and said, well, look, what about the possibility of having a conversation in a certain way? Let's role play what that way is. But how about you hold a different thought? And that different thought, what? My expertise is valuable and the right kind of clients will pay for quality. And so based on that, he went out and literally within a month was calling me to say that he'd secured a new client at a rate that he hadn't charged before, which was 22%. Now he's consistently charging 25%, and he's just kind of like his revenues increased significantly. He's probably had like a 30-40% increase in revenue. So it's made a massive difference. So let's talk then about how your actual beliefs create the results that you're getting in your business right now, because there's a very simple yet incredibly powerful framework that I use with clients. Now, this is a model that you apply, and you can apply to any situation. So let's choose an example to just have a play with. So let's have a look at what's going on in the market right now. There's the whole global economic situation. We've got political things going on. We've got obviously the implications of change of government. So there's a lot going on in terms of the environment that the recruitment industry and all businesses are operating in right now. Now, the thing is, we've got this particular situation, and what happens in this model is that the first part of the model is the thought, the T, the thought that we have and the meaning that we create and that we tell ourselves about what all these different dynamics going on in the market means for us and our business. And so let's take a real simple generic example. And that initial thought might be, when you consider all these different dynamics going on, that, well, 2025 is going to be a tough year in the recruitment industry. So that might be an individual's thought. Now, the second part of this model is that based on that thought, that thought creates a feeling. It's a physiological response. It's directly connected to the thought that we have. And that feeling might be fear. It could be panic. It could be anxiety. So there is a feeling, probably many, but there's often a dominant feeling that is triggered by this thought that we have. Now, what is interesting is that the next stage of the model is actions. And so when we're feeling a certain way, we will then go and do certain things. So if you're feeling anxious, it may well be that what you end up doing from a business perspective one particular day or week, could go on for several weeks, is that you procrastinate, that you withdraw. So you stop doing the kind of outreach that you've been doing. Perhaps you withdraw somewhat from your team because you're not feeling as clear and as confident to go and give direction and to be inspiring, to help motivate your team. So you withdraw. So what happens then is that they lose some focus, they lose some direction. And the consequence can be of that is that affects the pipeline, which obviously ultimately affects your results. So the things that you do are influenced by how you think. And of course, there's probably lots of dialogue going on in your head from that voice that's being critical, that's saying, come on, pull yourself together, get focused, get the team focused. You can't give up. So there's all that dialogue going on. And of course, while the procrastination is going on, the dialogue's going on, you're kind of like retreating somewhat, not doing the outreach and the activities that you normally do. While you're doing those things, clearly there'll be things that you're not doing. And some of those things may well be that you're not there leading the team in the way that you normally do. And so there are consequences to the actions that we take and actions that we don't take. And of course, they're the results that we get. And so those results might be that even if you've been quite flat from a business point of view and you're not growing, you're managing to do what you did last year, well then if you're coming from a place of fear or you're anxious and you're withdrawing and you're not doing all the usual activities that you normally do, well then of course that in itself is going to impact results, isn't it? And so you stay pretty stagnant. Now, that result is directly related to that first thought that, well, when you look at everything that's going on in the market, then of course the recruitment industry is going to have a tough 2025. Now, yes, look, let's be honest about it. There are things going on in the market. And interestingly, there are people that are still growing. that are doing okay. Yes, okay, they might not be growing at the rate they were in 2022, and yet they are growing, they are getting new clients. There are people that set up businesses in the last 12 to 24 months that are doing okay. I literally have spoken to, several companies in the last few weeks, and they've got 6 and 8 team members already. So how come they're able to do that? When you look at the thought that those individuals have, when they look at the same market dynamics, one individual said to me, well, I just look at it as whenever there are challenging times, then there are always equal opportunities for new businesses. And it's about how we go out there and grab those opportunities. Now, that is a very different thought and belief than the other one, where the market's challenging. And so these individuals, of course, fueled by the feeling of feeling inspired, feeling hopeful, feeling positive, feeling excited, with those kinds of feelings, then the actions that they take are very different to our previous individual. So they're focused, they've got a plan, they know what they're doing, they know who they want to target. They are actively out there on social media, they're involved with their marketing, they're doing outreach, they're leveraging their networks. They really are building a lot of momentum. Okay, it might be that the volume of activities they're having to do is more than maybe they did many years ago, and yet they're doing it. They're knuckling down and they're doing it. And what they're not doing is they are not getting caught up in feeling frustrated and the consequences of that. They're not getting drawn into too many conversations about how difficult and challenging things are. They're just focused on what they're doing. And of course, the results that they're getting are very different. And they're growing and they're hiring as well, which is fantastic. So we can all look at a situation and have a different interpretation. Just think about it from this point of view. How many times have you gone to the movies to see one of the latest blockbusters come out to the cinema? And let's take Avatar. I was out several years ago now, and we'd waited a long time. Was it probably 11, 12 years for the second installment? So there was lots and lots of hype about it. Now, I had my sister-in-law and my niece and nephew and one of their good friends all go to watch that movie. And when I asked them about, well, what did you think of it? Because we're thinking of going to see it. Then there were 4 different versions. One thought it was too long. One thought it was fantastic and they were absorbed in it, and on it goes. And when you think about how many times have you had that experience where you and your friend or your loved one have gone to the movies and you've come out, both been so excited to go and see this movie, and you come out and you've made very different meanings from the couple of hours that you've spent watching that movie. And that happens all the time, every single day. We can be in meetings and we can come out and we can have conversation with team members, and we've made different meanings from conversations that were happening. Now, if we come out of a meeting and we don't catch up with people to see what have they taken away from that meeting, you can now begin to understand if someone walks away with one thought and one meaning, and another team member walks away with another thought and another meaning, is there any wonder that they move into action and do different things?
I just wanted to take a moment to connect with all of you amazing listeners. As you know, our podcast isn't sponsored, and we pour our hearts into bringing you quality content for every single episode. Now, if you've been enjoying the show, I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn. You can find me at linkedin.com/Denise Oyston. That's Oyston. Just click that link, let's connect. And also a quick reminder that sharing our podcast or giving us a shout out on social goes a long way to helping grow our community and getting the message out there to all of the small recruitment companies and staffing companies and search companies that want to do well. Your support does mean the world to us, and it helps us to continue doing what we love. So thanks for being part of the journey. Now let's get back to that show.
So when we apply this concept to ourselves and managing our own thoughts, yes, we get to choose the thoughts that we have, and we really do. But the first thing is we need to be conscious and aware of the thought that we're having and the meaning that we are making from a certain situation. And the easiest way to handle that is to just kind of like take a step back, because we communicate through story. And because we're also quite emotional individuals, some people will kind of like build up those stories. Some will have short versions of those stories, but it will still be their interpretation of a situation. So what I'm going to ask you to do and suggest is that you hold back from the story of a situation and you look at it in a different way. So let's look at this different way, because it's about looking at the data, looking at the facts and figures. And so if we look at the market dynamics right now, and we look at the data that is coming out of the UK, America, Australia, specifically for our recruitment industry, it provides a slightly different picture. If you look at the data from the UK, then we have less jobs in the market available than we have had in the last quarter on quarter. But if you look at potential growth in the Australian market and the American market, then there is forecasted growth in those markets. If you look at the data in terms of the UK economy, well, it literally was announced at the end of last week that there'd been a growth in the first quarter slightly higher than anticipated. And we could go on, but they're the facts, okay? Now, the reality is, the other fact is that based on what is happening in that market, or let's say the international market with all the tariffs and everything, the fact is that as I'm recording this right now, we don't actually know specifically what the trading market is going to be like in the next 6 months, because the only thing we're certain about right now is uncertainty. Now, in an uncertain market, though, we've got a choice. What do we make that data mean? And we get to choose. We can make it mean it's going to be another tough 6 months, or we can make it mean, okay, in any kind of market, there's always opportunity, and I am going to find those opportunities. So this is not just about being positive and everything. It's so much more than just positive thinking. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that you just think positive and ignore what are some real business challenges. That isn't what this is about. What I'm saying is that many of the thoughts that you generally accept as, well, that's just the way things are right now, are actually interpretations of a situation, not necessarily the facts of a situation. Now, yes, okay, I've used the market dynamics as an example here, but think about other examples in your personal life, in your business. How many times do you go around repeating the same story as you're sharing what's happened with friends and family and colleagues? Now, if you take a particular situation and you step back and you looked at, okay, so what actually are the facts of what happened that day, during that conversation, during that incident, what are the facts? And actually, have I misinterpreted the facts? Now I look at them as facts. Let me just give you another quick business-related example. Working with two recruitment business owners who clearly both faced very similar situations, a major economic downturn. One owner interprets this as, well, this is just devastating. My business is going to be lucky to survive. Be quite clear about it. Second person, Well, this could really reshape our industry, and there'll be new opportunities for those who can adapt quickly. So that's what we're going to do. One hunkered down, kind of pulled in all their spending and everything, and just about weathered the storm. Whereas the other one just started looking left, right, and centre for where were all the opportunities, did a lot of pivoting. And although they didn't all come to fruition, but then when they found the one that they did, they really went for that and have been incredibly successful. So when we explore beliefs, remember that these aren't facts, they are just thoughts that you've practiced over and over again. You've been thinking the same thing over and over until you believe it. And that's the definition of a belief, a thought that you keep thinking. And so that there's this perception that, well, we can't change our beliefs. Well, absolutely, we can change our beliefs. We change our beliefs about what political parties we might vote for. We change our beliefs about what brands we like, sometimes from one season to the next. So we can change beliefs. So how do you actually change some of those limiting beliefs? Well, here's just one of the processes that I use when I'm working with clients. Firstly, identify that belief. What is that thought? It might be that you notice that you're feeling stuck or frustrated, and you can ask yourself, what am I believing or thinking about this situation? Write it down exactly as it appears and write it down in terms of facts. Now, a good tip here is if you suddenly start noting yourself writing, well, I feel that somebody said this, and then as soon as you get into that feeling, then stop because they're not the facts. Okay, so just write down exactly what it is that appears in your mind. Now, the next question then to ask yourself is, and there's several of them here, and it's, is this absolutely true? Can I absolutely know that this is true? You might then think about, well, what evidence do I have that this thought, that this belief is true? Now, they are three incredibly powerful questions. And my suggestion here is be brutally honest with yourself when you're answering those questions. The other question is to then follow on with is to just be honest and say, well, how do I react when I believe and hold this particular thought? Okay. And if I didn't hold that thought, who would I then become? Okay, because these are really kind of like amazing questions. And you could also think about the following question, which is, how would I, based on knowing the answers to those previous questions, okay, which again, is it true? Can I know it's absolutely true? How do I react when I have this thought? Who would I be if I didn't have this thought? Then you could lead on to, how would I advise a friend who believed this, knowing what I now know? Okay. So then when you've reflected on those answers, then you can start to think about, well, okay, what would be a more empowering thought that I could hold about this exact situation? Okay. And a simple way of doing this is by saying, well, what if the opposite of what I've been thinking? What if that was true? That's a really quick way of flipping an unhelpful thought and belief. So if you're stuck, then start there. And then test it out, because when you flip that thought, you can then notice how differently do you feel compared to the original thought. And when you're feeling, let's say, inspired versus frustrated, what ideas come to mind about what you could then do, what actions you could then go and take? and then compare when you're in inspired mode and you're feeling inspired and you take all those actions. Just notice the different results that you start getting, because they will be different to when you were feeling in comparison, if you were feeling frustrated about that given situation and the actions that you took. Notice the different actions. You've got to be really aware and really conscious, because when people say, I use this framework, Sharon, unconsciously, that's when I kind of get a little bit, okay, because the reality is that when you're working at this kind of level with those kind of questions and using a framework like this, you've really got to be consciously aware of your thoughts and what you're doing and how you're feeling. So it takes a lot of practice to get into unconscious competence with this framework. So if we think about a real practical, simple example, if someone's believed, I'm not good at winning new business, then if they identify a past success when they did win new business and it worked, and they can look at, what did they do? Think about creating an empowering thought that you can have that will enable you to move into the same kind of action, because a different thought will give you a different feeling that will trigger you to move into different action. So as we wrap up today, then, I want to leave you with this thought. Your business, it will grow when you decide to grow. And that growth, it often starts with challenging ourselves, challenging how we think, what our beliefs are. It's got to start with ourselves. It's so easy to be in and stay in our comfort zone. I will always remember a mentor saying, a person's degree of success is related to the degree of discomfort that they are willing to put themselves in. And so that reminds me of the fact that so many of us spend so much time in our comfort zones, and it's about challenging ourselves to keep stepping outside. And as soon as something feels easy and comfortable, that's the cue. That's the cue to start thinking, right, okay, it's too comfortable. Now I need to start working and looking at myself again. And that starts with looking at the thoughts that you're having and the beliefs that you're having. The recruitment owners that I've seen be the most successful, have the most remarkable transformations, and not necessarily the most experienced, or even, if I think about it, the most well-connected. They are, however, the ones willing to question the limiting stories that they're telling themselves, and to be open to playing and experimenting with different thoughts and different ways of doing things. So this week, I invite you and I encourage you to notice one belief that might be holding you back, and ask yourself, what if this isn't true? What would be possible for me if I didn't hold this belief? And if you'd like to explore how coaching could help you identify and transform your own limiting beliefs, then you know where to find me. So thanks for listening. And remember, your beliefs are the foundations of your business. Build them wisely and you'll build your success. So that's bye for now.
If you enjoy this podcast and this year you are ready to take your marketing to the next level, then check out Superfast Circle. This is a unique marketing program designed specifically for recruiters and their marketeers. You get access to 2 virtual marketing directors, you get consultancy, you get your hand held through the whole process, training, consulting, and we provide content resources. So go over to superfastrecruitment.co.uk/join and check out what's available.